Hey guys, welcome back to another quiet evening together. Tonight we're pulling out of the driveway and heading down a 2-lane highway towards something America used to do so well. The family vacation. Not the kind with boarding passes and rental car insurance forms, but the kind with a station wagon packed to the ceiling, a paper road map folded wrong, and a father squinting at road signs while everyone in the back seat pretends not to be carsick. Before we get going, I want to say a real thank you to the viewer who suggested this one. You always seem to know exactly what this channel needs, and honestly, some of the best evenings we've spent together started with an idea one of you dropped in the comments. If you're new here, welcome, and if you've been here a while, you know the drill. A like helps more than you'd think, a subscribe means the world, and a comment telling me where you're tuning in from always makes my night. And if you'd rather listen than watch, we're now on Spotify too, the link's down in the description, whenever you want to bring us along on your own drive somewhere. So go ahead and get yourself settled. Dim the lights if you've got them on. Turn on a fan if you like that low hum in the background. Pull the blanket up. We're going to be here a while, and there's nowhere else you need to be. What did it actually feel like to load up a car in 1955? Back when a road trip was still a genuine adventure instead of a countdown of exits? What did those first few miles smell like? Vinyl seats warming in the sun, a thermos of coffee sweating on the dashboard. What did families really do when the radio signal faded out somewhere between towns? Did the kids get bored the way we imagine? Or was there a kind of patience back then that's harder to find now? What did it feel like to pull into a motor court after dark, tired and sunburned, and see that flickering neon vacancy sign glowing just for you? And just like that, it is 1955. The car is packed. The cooler is full of sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Somebody's already asking, are we there yet? And the day and the whole trip ahead of you is just beginning. The night before you leave, the driveway becomes a staging ground. You carry out suitcases 2 at a time, setting them down on the concrete in the shape of a puzzle you'll spend the next 20 minutes solving. Your father stands with his hands on his hips, studying the trunk like it's a chessboard, deciding which bag goes where with the seriousness of a man who has done this every summer of his life and still hasn't gotten it quite right. The porch light throws a soft yellow glow across the driveway, moths circling it lazily, and somewhere down the block a dog barks twice and then falls quiet again. You can hear your mother inside, moving through the house room by room, checking the stove, checking the locks, checking the list she wrote 3 days ago, and has already checked twice tonight. There is a particular kind of electricity in the air on a night like this. The feeling that tomorrow is going to be different from every other day, and even the familiar shape of your own house looks slightly changed in the dark, like it already knows you're leaving. The suitcases themselves tell their own story. There's the big one, hard-sided and scuffed at the corners, that always goes in first because it's heaviest and has to sit flat against the back of the trunk. There's the smaller one, packed with just enough for the first night at the motor court, because nobody wants to dig through everything just to find a toothbrush. There's the box of snacks your mother has assembled with real strategy. Crackers, a tin of cookies, a jar of peanut butter. Because she has learned the hard way that hunger and boredom together in the back seat of a car are a dangerous combination. Your father works with a flashlight clenched between his teeth, rearranging things twice, sometimes 3 times, muttering to himself about weight distribution like he's loading a ship rather than a station wagon. You stand nearby holding a pillow you insist on bringing, even though there's barely room for it, because that particular pillow has ridden along on every trip you can remember, and somehow the vacation would feel wrong without it. The cooler gets packed last, right before bed, because your mother knows the ice won't hold if it goes in too early. She layers it carefully, sandwiches on top, a jug of lemonade wedged in the corner, a block of ice sweating faintly under a dish towel. The whole process has a rhythm to it that never quite gets written down anywhere, but somehow every family seems to know the steps by heart. By the time everything is settled, the trunk closes with a heavy, satisfying thud, one that feels like the actual beginning of the trip even though the car won't move an inch until morning. You stand in the driveway for a moment in your pajamas, looking at the packed car sitting there in the dark, tyres slightly sunk under the weight of it all. And there's something almost magical about a car that's ready to go somewhere before you've even gone to sleep. Inside, the house feels strange in its half-readiness. Cupboards left slightly ajar where your mother pulled out the last of the road snacks. The kitchen counter cleared except for a single note reminding whoever waters the plants which ones need the most attention. You wander from room to room in your bare feet, touching the backs of familiar chairs, running a hand along the edge of the kitchen table, the way you might say goodbye to someone without quite knowing why it feels necessary. Your mother finally comes to find you, gently steering you toward the bathroom for one last wash before bed. Her voice softer than usual, distracted in the pleasant way people get distracted the night before something good. She reminds you, for the third time, that the alarm is set early, that you'll want to be ready to go the moment your father backs the car out, and there's no use arguing about it, because everyone in the house already knows sleep is going to be a losing battle tonight anyway. You lie in bed longer than usual, listening to the house settle, unable to fully quiet your mind. Somewhere down the hall, you can hear your parents' voices, low and unhurried, going over the route one more time, debating whether to stop for breakfast on the road or eat something quick before leaving. Their voices blend into the hum of the window fan, and after a while you can't quite tell if you're still listening or simply drifting. Tomorrow feels impossibly far away and impossibly close all at once. Somewhere out there, a whole country full of roads is waiting, diners you haven't eaten in yet, towns whose names you don't know, all of it sitting patiently just past the edge of sleep. For tonight, all you can do is close your eyes and let the anticipation carry you toward morning, the packed car waiting quietly in the driveway, moths still circling the porch light, everything ready and nothing yet begun. It is the kind of quiet excitement that is harder to find now, when a trip can be booked and boarded in the space of an afternoon. Back then, the waiting itself was part of the vacation, and there was something worth savouring in a night spent simply looking forward to leaving. By 8 in the morning, the car has already been sitting in the sun long enough that the seats are hot to the touch, and that particular smell rises up to meet you the second you open the door. Warm vinyl, a hint of motor oil, the ghost of last year's cigarette smoke that never quite left the upholstery. You slide in anyway, because that smell is simply what a vacation smells like, and some part of you will spend the rest of your life chasing it without knowing why. The driveway is bathed in that early slanted light that hasn't quite decided how hot the day is going to get. Your mother makes one last trip into the house, checking the stove for the third time, while your father stands beside the open driver's door with his hat already on, patient in the particular way fathers are patient when they know a trip is finally actually happening. You climb into the back seat, and the vinyl practically hisses against the bare skin of your legs, a small shock that makes you shift and adjust before settling in. The windows are cracked just enough to let a thread of morning air move through the car, though it does little against the heat trapped inside overnight. Dust motes hang suspended in the shaft of sunlight cutting across the back seat, and you watch them drift lazily, in no hurry at all, the way the whole morning seems to be moving. Your sibling climbs in beside you, already staking claim to the window seat with an elbow, and the negotiation over territory begins before the car has even left the driveway. There's a particular ritual to those first few minutes. Your father adjusts the rearview mirror, checks it twice, then checks the side mirror, though nothing about either has changed since yesterday. Your mother settles into the passenger seat with her purse on her lap, and the road atlas already open across her knees, folded to the right page with a corner turned down. She traces the route with one finger, the way she always does, murmuring the names of towns you'll pass through like she's reciting a small prayer for a safe journey. Somewhere behind you, a neighbour steps out onto their porch in a robe to collect the morning paper, lifting a hand in a lazy wave that your father returns through the open window. The whole neighbourhood seems to still be waking up around you, curtains just beginning to shift in a few windows, a paper boy pedalling slowly down the block, and there's something quietly satisfying about being the one family already fully in motion, while the rest of the street is only just stirring. The engine turns over with a low rumble, and the whole car seems to exhale, vinyl creaking gently under the shift of everyone settling in for real now. Your father backs slowly out of the driveway, checking twice for the neighbour's cat, and the house recedes behind you, smaller in the rearview mirror with every passing second. There's a specific kind of hush that falls over everyone in these first few blocks, the neighbourhood sliding by, familiar mailboxes and familiar lawns, everything about it already starting to feel like it belongs to a version of the day that's already over. You press your cheek against the warm glass of the window, watching the world tilt and blur slightly as the car picks up speed, and the smell of vinyl and warm dust settles fully around you now, mixing with the faint smell of coffee steaming from the thermos wedged between the front seats. It's not an unpleasant smell. It's simply the smell of beginning, the particular scent that will forever afterward remind you, with no warning at all, of mornings exactly like this one. By the time you reach the edge of town, the familiar streets have given way to something wider and less known. Gas stations and feed stores you've passed 100 times but never really looked at, and the car settles into the steady hum of real travel, tyres finding their rhythm against the pavement. You glance once more at the house in your memory, already fading a little at the edges, and turn your attention forward instead, toward whatever the day is about to offer. It is the kind of smell that no air freshener has ever managed to bottle, something too specific and too tied to memory to ever really be recreated. And yet somehow, decades later, a whiff of warm vinyl on a hot afternoon can still pull you straight back into that back seat, cheek pressed to glass the whole day and the whole trip still ahead of you. For the first hour on the road, there's a kind of quiet that only exists at the beginning of a trip, before anyone's restless, before anyone's asked a single question about how much farther. The tyres hum against the pavement. The window is cracked just enough to let in a thread of outside air. Everyone is still full of the morning's coffee and the simple, uncomplicated hope that this is going to be a good one. The highway stretches out ahead in a long grey ribbon, flanked by telephone poles that click past with a steady, hypnotic rhythm, one after another, like the ticking of some enormous clock counting down the miles. Your father drives with one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting on the open window frame, tapping lightly along with whatever's playing on the radio, a tune half drowned by static that nobody bothers to adjust because the quiet itself feels comfortable enough to leave alone. In the back seat, you watch the fields slide by, corn or wheat or something you can't quite name, rippling gently in a breeze you can't feel from inside the car. Every so often a farmhouse appears in the distance, small and solitary, a barn beside it, a line of laundry strung between two poles, and you find yourself wondering, just briefly, what it might be like to live in a house like that, so far from anything, so quiet. Your mother has her window cracked too, just an inch, and the air moving through the car carries the smell of cut grass and warm asphalt. Occasionally, the faint tang of a nearby feedlot that makes your sibling wrinkle their nose dramatically before the smell passes and is forgotten. Nobody complains yet. Complaints come later, once boredom sets in properly, but for now there's a kind of peace settled over the whole car, the specific stillness of a family that hasn't yet had the chance to get tired of each other. You watch the speedometer needle from where you sit, curious the way children are curious about numbers that mean nothing to them yet. And your father catches your eye in the rearview mirror and gives the smallest wink, like the two of you share a secret about how fast the world is allowed to move today. The road hums beneath the tyres in a low, steady note, occasionally broken by the seam of a bridge or the rougher patch where new asphalt meets old, and each little bump feels like punctuation in an otherwise unbroken sentence of highway. Somewhere in that first hour, you notice how different the light looks out here compared to at home. Wider somehow. Less broken up by rooftops and power lines, spilling across the fields in a way that makes even ordinary things, a grain silo, a water tower, a stand of trees, look faintly important, worth watching. You don't yet know the names of half of what you're seeing, but that doesn't stop you from watching closely, cataloguing it all in that quiet, private way children do, storing away images they won't understand the value of until years later. A hawk circles once above a fence post, and you track it silently until it dips out of sight behind a stand of trees, gone before you can even point it out to anyone. Your sibling has already grown quiet beside you, forehead resting against the glass, eyes half closed, lulled by the rhythm of the road the way only a child can be lulled by simple motion and nothing else. Your mother turns a page of her magazine without really reading it, glancing up now and then to check the mile markers against her map. The thermos gets passed forward for a refill of coffee at some point, and your mother pours carefully without looking, her eyes still tracing the map open on her lap. Nobody speaks much. There's no need to yet. The whole car is simply moving forward together, all of you quietly glad to finally be doing the thing you spent the last week talking about. Somewhere ahead, though none of you know it yet, the first town of the day is waiting, its water tower just beginning to rise faintly on the horizon, but for now that's still a mile or two away, and there's no rush to get there. The morning stretches on unhurried, the whole family suspended in that particular, unrepeatable stillness that only exists in the first hour of a long drive. It is the kind of quiet that is harder to find now, in a world of radio hosts talking over each other and phones buzzing every few minutes. Back then, an hour could pass with almost nothing said at all, and somehow that silence felt like togetherness rather than distance, the whole family simply existing side by side, watching the same world go by. Somewhere around the second hour, boredom starts to set in, and that's when the games begin. The quiet kind that don't need a board or a deck of cards. You press your forehead to the glass and start counting license plates from other states, calling them out like tiny victories. Nebraska, Ohio. Somebody spots a Florida plate and the whole car goes momentarily silent with respect, because that means somebody out there has driven even farther than you have. The rules of the game were never written down anywhere, and yet everyone in the car seems to know them instinctively, passed down the way certain things are passed down in families without anyone ever quite explaining why. You watch each passing car with real intensity now, studying the rectangle of colour on its bumper, the way a detective might study a clue, calling out the state the moment you spot it, sometimes a beat before your sibling does, which earns you a small, satisfied thrill, entirely out of proportion to what you've actually accomplished. Your father plays along without seeming to, occasionally slowing just slightly as a car passes so you can get a better look, though he'd never admit to helping. Your mother keeps a mental tally, or pretends to, settling arguments about whether a plate has already been counted with the calm authority of someone who has clearly done this before, on some other trip, in some other year, with some other set of squabbling children in the back seat. The scenery outside becomes a kind of background hum to the real business of the game, though every so often something breaks through, a particularly interesting truck, a barn with a faded advertisement painted across its side, A roadside stand selling something you can't quite make out from this distance. But mostly, your attention stays fixed on the passing traffic, waiting for that flash of colour that means another state has entered the count. A trucker in the next lane catches you counting and offers a slow, deliberate honk on his horn, the kind that makes you jump and then laugh, delighted that a total stranger somehow noticed the game at all. Your sibling waves wildly at him until he's well past the car, and for a moment that single honk becomes the most exciting thing that's happened all morning, worth recounting twice over before the memory of it even has time to fade. When somebody spots a plate from somewhere truly distant, California or Maine, or someplace that feels almost fictional from the vantage point of the back seat, there's a genuine hush that falls over the car, a small collective moment of awe. You try to imagine the driver of that car, what road they must have been on days ago, what they must have seen along the way, and for a moment the whole vast size of the country presses in on you, in a way it rarely does when you're simply looking at a map. The game stretches on for miles, ebbing and flowing depending on the density of traffic, sometimes going quiet for long stretches when the road empties out and there's nothing to count at all. In those lulls, you simply watch the landscape, half waiting, half daydreaming, until another car appears on the horizon and the game snaps back to life. Your father hums along to something on the radio during these gaps, and your mother refolds the map along its worn creases, careful not to tear the parts that have already gone soft from handling. By the time you've counted a dozen states, the number starts to blur together, and the game becomes less about winning and more about the simple rhythm of it, the shared attention, the quiet cooperation of a family working toward the same small, meaningless, and entirely satisfying goal. Nobody is really keeping score anymore, not really, but nobody stops playing either, because stopping would mean admitting the game was ever really about winning in the first place, and it never was. It is the kind of game that costs nothing and needs nothing. No batteries, no screen, no rules beyond what everyone already understands. There is something almost old-fashioned even in the memory of it, a reminder of how little it once took to keep a car full of restless children entertained for an entire afternoon. Just a window, some passing traffic, and the simple pleasure of paying attention together. Around noon, the car slows and turns into the gravel lot of a diner you've never seen before and will likely never see again. The kind of place that exists only along that particular stretch of highway. Inside, the air smells like frying onions and old coffee, and a waitress who has clearly done this 1,000 times slides 4 glasses of water across the counter before anyone's even asked. The gravel crunches loudly under the tyres as your father pulls in, parking at an angle beside a row of other cars, most of them just as dusty, most of them clearly carrying their own families through their own version of this same afternoon. The diner itself is a low building with a striped awning faded almost colourless by years of sun, a hand-lettered sign in the window advertising the daily special in cheerful, slightly crooked paint. Stepping out of the car after hours of sitting feels like a small revelation, your legs stiff, the ground beneath your feet solid and unmoving in a way that takes a moment to adjust to. The gravel lot radiates heat up through the soles of your shoes, and somewhere nearby a screen door bangs shut, followed by laughter from inside. Walking through the door, you're hit immediately with the smell, onions sizzling somewhere behind the counter, the sharper tang of coffee that's been sitting in the pot a little too long, and underneath it all, the faint smell of cigarette smoke that seems to live permanently in the wood panelling of every diner like this one. A bell above the door announces your arrival, and a few regular customers glance up briefly from their own booths, before returning to their conversations. The waitress who greets you moves with the easy efficiency of someone who has worked this same counter for years, maybe decades, sliding into a booth seat cushion long worn soft in the middle, calling out a greeting to your father like she might actually remember him, though you suspect she says the same thing to every travelling family that comes through that door. She sets down 4 glasses of water without a word, condensation already beading on the outside of each glass, and hands over a set of menus sticky at the corners from years of hands just like yours. You slide into the booth, the vinyl seat cool compared to the car, a small relief you didn't know you needed. The table has a chrome napkin dispenser and a squat glass bottle of ketchup with a crust dried around the cap, and you spin the little jukebox selector mounted at the edge of the table, flipping through song titles you don't recognise just for something to do with your hands. A ceiling fan turns slowly overhead, barely stirring the warm air, and somewhere in the kitchen a radio plays low beneath the clatter of pans and the sizzle of the griddle. An older man at the counter reads a folded newspaper with real concentration, occasionally sipping coffee from a mug that's been refilled so many times it no longer needs to be asked for. The whole diner has the unhurried feel of a place that has seen every kind of traveller pass through, and long ago stopped being surprised by any of them. Your father orders coffee before he's even opened the menu, the way he always does, and your mother studies the offerings with real seriousness, asking the waitress a quiet question about the meatloaf. You and your sibling debate loudly over the merits of a hamburger versus a grilled cheese, a debate that somehow takes up several minutes despite having no real stakes at all. When the food finally arrives, it's simple and unremarkable in the best possible way, the kind of meal that tastes better simply because you're hungry and tired and glad to be sitting still for a moment. The milkshake, when it comes, arrives in a tall glass with the metal mixing tin set beside it, still half full, a small bonus refill that feels like a genuine gift. Outside, through the window, you can see the highway stretching on, cars passing steadily, none of them stopping, all of them headed somewhere else entirely. For this 1.5 hour, though, you're not going anywhere. You're just sitting in a booth in a town you'll never remember the name of, eating lunch with your family, the whole rest of the trip waiting patiently outside. It is the kind of stop that doesn't exist quite the same way anymore, a diner with no name brand attached to it, no drive-through window, just a waitress who calls you honey, and a milkshake that comes with a little extra on the side. Somewhere in the early afternoon, the piece breaks down the way it always does. An elbow crosses an invisible line, a foot drifts too far into someone else's side, and suddenly there's a full diplomatic crisis unfolding in the back seat. Your mother doesn't even turn around. She simply says a name, just one, in a tone that ends the entire argument instantly, the way only a mother's voice from the front seat ever could. The trouble usually begins so small it's almost impossible to trace back to its origin. A shoe that strays 1/2 inch too far past some imaginary boundary, drawn down the exact centre of the back seat. A sigh that's a little too loud. A comment about someone breathing too much. By early afternoon, the novelty of the trip has worn thin enough that these small offences start to feel enormous, magnified by heat and boredom, and the simple fact that there's nowhere else to go. You feel the tension rise before it fully erupts, a certain stiffening beside you, a sharp intake of breath that means a complaint is coming. Your sibling's voice cuts through the quiet hum of the tyres, indignant, certain of some injustice that only makes sense from inside a car that's been in motion for 4 hours straight. You fire back just as certain of your own righteousness, and for a moment the backseat becomes a courtroom with no judge willing to rule fairly. Then comes your mother's voice, calm, flat, using exactly one word, a first name spoken with just enough weight behind it to carry across the entire car without her ever raising her volume. It's remarkable, really, how effective it is, how completely it dissolves whatever argument had seemed, only seconds before, like the most important thing in the world. You both fall silent almost instantly, chastened, staring out your respective windows with theatrical wounded dignity. Your father glances briefly in the rearview mirror, saying nothing, letting your mother's single word do all the necessary work. He adjusts the radio dial slightly, as if that alone might restore the peace, and for a few minutes it actually does. The silence that follows isn't quite as comfortable as the morning's quiet had been. It has an edge to it now. A residue of grievance still hanging faintly in the air, but it holds. You stare out the window, arms crossed, watching the fields blur by, privately still convinced you are entirely in the right. Beside you, your sibling does the same, equally convinced of the opposite. Neither of you says anything more, though every few minutes one of you steals a glance at the other, checking to see if the argument might be worth reviving. Your mother, without turning around, reaches back with one hand and offers a small bag of crackers, a peace offering disguised as a snack, and you both take one without acknowledging what it really is. The crunch of crackers becomes the only sound in the car for a while, punctuated occasionally by the radio's static-laced music drifting up from the front seat. By the time the argument has fully faded, replaced by the simple boredom of watching mile after mile of unchanging scenery, neither of you can quite remember what started it in the first place. It rarely matters. These small skirmishes are simply part of the rhythm of a long drive, weather that passes through the car the way weather passes over a field, sudden and brief and gone again before it leaves any lasting mark. Your father catches your eye once more in the mirror, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly, some private amusement he keeps mostly to himself. He's seen 100 of these skirmishes over the years, in 100 different summers, and he knows better than anyone that they'll blow over just as quickly as they arrived, leaving the car exactly as peaceful as it was before. It is the kind of small storm that no vacation is complete without. Brief, forgettable, and somehow, looking back on it now, one of the things you remember most fondly of all, proof that even paradise, even a family vacation, could never quite manage to be entirely without friction. Somewhere along the highway, a hand-painted sign starts teasing you 100 miles out, promising the world's largest something, a ball of twine, a concrete dinosaur, a rock shop shaped like a teepee. Your father always groans about the detour, but he always takes it anyway, and you understand even then that half the fun of a trip like this is stopping for things that don't matter at all. The first sign appears almost without warning, propped up on the shoulder of the road, its paint peeling at the edges, but the message still perfectly legible. See the world's largest ball of twine, only 87 miles ahead. You read it aloud from the back seat before anyone else has even had a chance to notice it, and your sibling immediately wants to know what it means, why anyone would build a ball of twine large enough to advertise from nearly 100 miles away. Your father lets out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind he reserves specifically for these moments, muttering something about how every single trip somehow finds its way to one of these attractions, whether he plans for it or not. But there's a softness underneath the complaint, a familiar performance the whole family recognizes, because you all know perfectly well that he'll take the detour the moment it appears, no matter how much grumbling comes first. The signs multiply as the miles pass, each one shaving a little more distance off the last 60 miles, then 40, then 20, building anticipation the way only a good roadside attraction sign knows how. By the time the number drops into single digits, even your mother has set her map aside, glancing up at each new sign with a small, amused smile as invested as anyone in seeing whatever oddity waits at the end of this particular detour. When you finally arrive, it never quite matches the grandeur promised by all those miles of signage, and somehow that's part of the charm. The ball of twine, or the concrete dinosaur, or the teepee-shaped gift shop sits a little smaller than imagined, a little more sun-faded, guarded by a hand-lettered placard explaining its history in a few earnest sentences that nobody reads too closely. There's usually an old man running the place sitting on a folding chair in the shade, who seems genuinely pleased that anyone bothered to stop at all. You climb out of the car and walk around the attraction slowly, circling it the way you might circle a sculpture in a museum, though there's nothing museum-like about the gravel lot or the flies buzzing lazily around a nearby trash can. Your sibling reaches out to touch it, testing whether it feels the way it looks, and your father takes a photograph with the family camera, angling everyone to stand beside the thing so the scale of it, however unimpressive it might seem in real life, still comes through in the picture. Inside the little shop attached to most of these stops, shelves are crowded with postcards depicting the very attraction you just walked around outside, along with keychains, shot glasses and small plastic replicas that will end up rattling around in a junk drawer within a year. You're allowed to pick one small souvenir, and the decision takes on an outsized importance, weighed carefully against the limited real estate in your suitcase and the limited patience of your parents standing at the register. The old man behind the counter, or sometimes a woman knitting quietly in the corner, rings up your purchase without much ceremony, tucking it into a small paper bag that already smells faintly of the shop itself, dust and sun-warmed plastic and something like old rope. You thank them the way your mother's taught you to, and they nod back, unsurprised, having heard the same polite thank you from 1,000 children just like you over the years. Walking back to the car, you glance over your shoulder one more time at whatever oddity you just left behind, already feeling it slip a little into the category of things you'll remember only vaguely, a fragment of a much longer trip. Your father starts the engine, still shaking his head slightly, though there's no real complaint left in it now, and pulls back out onto the highway, the next set of signs, for some entirely different attraction, already waiting somewhere up ahead. It is the kind of stop that serves no real purpose beyond itself, no education, no necessity, just the simple pleasure of seeing something strange because a sign told you to. And it is exactly the kind of pointless, wonderful detour that a modern trip, planned down to the last reservation, rarely leaves room for anymore. There's a particular thrill in crossing into a new state, a plain metal sign on the shoulder of the road that somehow feels like an occasion. Your mother calls out the name of the new state like an announcement, and for a moment the whole car feels the quiet satisfaction of having gone somewhere, even if the landscape on either side of that sign looks exactly the same. You've been watching for it for miles, ever since your mother mentioned you were getting close, checking every green sign that flashes past for the telltale shape of a state marker instead of the usual mile count or exit number. The anticipation builds in that particular way that only children seem capable of sustaining, full attention fixed on a single, specific, entirely predictable event that hasn't happened yet. When the sign finally appears, simple white letters against a plain metal background, welcoming you to wherever it is you're headed next, your mother reads it aloud with real enthusiasm, as though she hadn't already known it was coming for the last 20 miles. "Welcome to wherever," she says, and there's genuine warmth in her voice, the kind reserved for small ceremonial moments that don't really mean anything, and yet somehow mean everything. You press your face to the glass to watch the sign pass, craning your neck to keep it in view for as long as possible, as if it might disappear before you've had the chance to fully register it. Your sibling does the same on the other side of the car, and for a brief moment there's no argument about territory, no negotiation over who gets the better view, just a shared, unified focus on the same small piece of metal standing at the edge of the road. The landscape on either side of the state line looks, of course, exactly the same as it did 30 seconds earlier. The same fields, the same fence posts, the same stretch of grey highway unspooling ahead. and yet something about it feels different now, charged with the invisible significance of having crossed an actual boundary, even if that boundary exists only on paper somewhere in a government office none of you will ever see. Your father slows down just slightly as you pass the sign, not enough to be noticeable to anyone outside the car, but enough that you all get a proper look at it, an unspoken acknowledgement that this moment deserves at least a small measure of ceremony. He glances at the odometer, doing quick math in his head about how many miles you've covered so far today, and announces the number out loud, adding it to the running total your mother has been keeping in the back of the road atlas. There's a version of this ritual that happens every single time, no matter which state line you're crossing, no matter how many times you've done it before on other trips in other years. The names blur together sometimes. In memory, one welcome sign indistinguishable from the last, and yet in the moment, each crossing feels entirely singular, worth pointing out, worth marking somehow, even if only with a single spoken sentence from the front seat. Your mother pulls the map a little closer, tracing the new state's outline with her finger, murmuring the names of towns you'll pass through over the coming hours. You watch her finger move across the paper, following along even though you can't quite read the tiny print from where you sit, trusting that she knows exactly where this next stretch of the journey is going to take you. For a few minutes after crossing, the whole car seems slightly more awake, energized by the small milestone, conversation picking up again after a lull, someone asking how many more states are left before you reach your final destination. The answer, whatever it is, gets repeated once or twice, turned over and considered, a new number to look forward to as the miles continue sliding by beneath you. It is the kind of thrill that seems almost too small to mention now. A plain metal sign, a name you'll forget by next year, and yet in that moment, in the middle of a long, hot afternoon on the highway, it felt like genuine progress, real evidence that you were, in fact, getting somewhere, mile by mile, state by state, exactly the way a family vacation is supposed to unfold. When the drive gets long enough, your father pulls off onto a gravel turnout beside some unnamed lake, just to let everyone stretch their legs for 10 minutes. You wander down to the water's edge and search the ground for flat stones, the kind that skip, and for a little while the whole trip pauses to watch the water ring out in circles. The turnout appears without much warning, just a widening in the shoulder of the road where the gravel spreads out to accommodate a handful of parked cars, and your father eases off the highway with the practiced instinct of someone who has learned, over many summers, exactly how long a family can sit still before real trouble starts brewing in the back seat. The lake beyond the turnout isn't large or particularly scenic, nothing that would appear on any postcard, but it catches the afternoon light in a way that makes it worth the stop regardless. Stepping out of the car, the air feels different here, cooler somehow, carrying the faint mineral smell of water and mud that only exists near a lake like this one. Your legs are stiff from sitting, and the short walk down toward the water's edge feels like its own small luxury, muscles stretching in ways they hadn't realized they needed. Your sibling races ahead, already scanning the ground for the flattest, smoothest stones, while your parents follow more slowly, your father rolling his shoulders, your mother shading her eyes against the glare off the water. The shoreline here is mostly gravel and scrubby grass, a few scattered wildflowers pushing up through the rocks, and you crouch down to search through the stones with real concentration, turning over dozens of unremarkable ones before finding a single flat grey stone that feels exactly right in your palm. Your father demonstrates the proper throw, wrist snapping low and flat, and the stone skips 3 times across the surface before disappearing beneath a small ring of ripples that spreads outward and eventually fades. You try to copy his motion, and your first attempt sinks immediately with a disappointing plunk, but you keep searching for better stones, keep trying, and eventually manage a single satisfying skip that feels like a genuine accomplishment. Your sibling has better luck, or perhaps simply more patience, and manages several skips in a row, prompting a small, good-natured rivalry that unfolds entirely without adult intervention, since your parents have wandered a short distance down the shore talking quietly between themselves. The lake itself is quiet at this hour. No other families visible along its edges, just the gentle lap of small waves against the gravel and the occasional distant call of a bird somewhere across the water. A dragonfly hovers low over the surface, hesitating in the warm air before darting off toward the reeds growing along the far bank. You watch it go, momentarily distracted from the stones in your hand, caught up in the simple, unhurried rhythm of a place that has nowhere else to be. Your father checks his watch eventually, the way he always does, calculating how much longer you can afford to linger before the day's schedule starts slipping away from you. But he doesn't rush anyone just yet, content for a few more minutes to stand at the water's edge with his hands in his pockets, watching his children throw stones with the same quiet satisfaction he might have felt doing the exact same thing as a boy, on some other lake, in some other summer, long before you were born. Your mother finds a smooth, flat rock of her own, and, to everyone's surprise, sends it skipping cleanly across the water in a long, graceful arc, 4 skips before it finally sinks. She laughs at the shocked expressions on both your faces, clearly pleased with herself, and for a moment the whole family stands together at the edge of an unnamed lake, entirely unhurried, entirely present, nothing ahead of you but the rest of the afternoon. Eventually your father calls everyone back toward the car, and you take one last look at the water, its surface now calm again, betraying no trace of the stones you'd thrown into it. Walking back up toward the gravel turnout, your shoes crunching against loose rock, you already feel the pull of the road again, but the 10 minutes spent by the water's edge linger pleasantly, a small, cool pocket of stillness tucked into the middle of a long, hot day. It is the kind of stop that never makes it onto any itinerary, a lake with no name, a handful of stones, 10 minutes that cost nothing and led nowhere in particular, and yet it remains, somehow, one of the clearest memories of the whole trip, water rippling outward in perfect, widening circles. Somewhere along the way, you stop at a drive-in with a bright striped awning, where a young woman on roller skates glides out to your window with a tray that clips right onto the door. There's something almost theatrical about it, the whole family leaning forward to watch her balance, root beer floats without spilling a drop. The drive-in appears just as the afternoon starts sliding toward evening, its sign lit up early even though the sun hasn't fully set, red and yellow bulbs spelling out a name you won't remember by tomorrow, but will recognize instantly if you ever pass a place just like it again. Your father pulls into one of the marked stalls, angling the car carefully so the window lined up with the small metal speaker box mounted on a post, and for a moment nobody quite knows what to do, waiting for some signal that the ordering process has begun. A crackling voice comes through the speaker, slightly garbled, asking what you'd like, and your mother leans across the front seat to place the order, checking twice with everyone in the back about exactly what kind of float or sandwich they want before committing to anything. There's a particular thrill in ordering food without ever having to leave the car, the whole transaction happening through a metal box and a disembodied voice, feeling faintly futuristic even though it's already been happening this way for years. The wait afterwards stretches out pleasantly. Nothing to do but watch the parking lot fill up slowly with other cars, families and teenagers, and a few solitary drivers, all angled the same way toward their own speaker boxes, all waiting for their own trays to arrive. String lights hang overhead between poles, not yet glowing brightly against the fading daylight, and somewhere a radio plays faintly from another car's open window, a song drifting across the lot and mixing with the murmur of conversation. When the car hop finally appears, she moves across the lot with real skill. Roller skates carrying her smoothly between parked cars, weaving around a stray dog that's wandered in from somewhere, balancing a tray loaded with drinks and sandwiches with a poise that seems almost impossible given the uneven pavement beneath her wheels. She reaches your window and clips the tray onto the frame with a practice motion, the metal edge fitting perfectly into place, and hands out the order one item at a time, checking names or simply guessing correctly which drink belongs to which outstretched hand. Your root beer float arrives in a tall glass, foam already beginning to rise gently over the rim, a straw and a long spoon propped against the side. You take the first sip carefully, balancing the glass against the slight wobble of the tray, and the sweetness of the root beer mixed with the cold vanilla ice cream feels like exactly the right reward after a long day on the road. Your sibling attempts the same balancing act with slightly less grace, and a small amount of foam ends up on the seat, prompting your mother to hand over a napkin without much real concern. Outside, the last of the daylight fades slowly into evening, and the string lights overhead finally flicker on, casting a warm, colourful glow across the whole lot. Other cars continue arriving, headlights sweeping briefly across the pavement before settling into their own stalls, and the car hops move between them all with the same easy confidence, trays balanced, skates gliding, seemingly unbothered by the increasing bustle around them. Your father leans back against his seat, sandwich in hand, watching the scene with quiet contentment, the kind of relaxed satisfaction that only comes after a full day of driving, followed by exactly the right kind of stop. Your mother sips her own drink slowly, glancing occasionally at the darkening sky, already thinking ahead to how much farther you'll need to drive before finding tonight's motor court, though, for now, she seems perfectly willing to let that thought wait. When the meal is finished, the car hop returns to collect the tray, unclipping it from the window with the same smooth motion she'd used to attach it, offering a friendly goodbye before skating off toward another car that's just pulled in. Your father starts the engine again, and the drive-in slips away behind you, its lights glowing warmly in the rearview mirror for a little while, before finally disappearing around a bend in the road. It is the kind of stop that feels like pure spectacle, part meal and part performance, gone now except for the memory of skates gliding smoothly across pavement and root beer floats balanced perfectly on a tray that never once tipped, no matter how uneven the ground beneath it. On the nights you camp instead of stopping at a motel, the evening takes on a slower rhythm. Your father works at pitching the tent while the smell of citronella candles drifts through the campsite, keeping the mosquitoes at bay just enough to make sitting outside bearable as the light fades. The campground itself sits tucked among a scattering of tall pines, each site marked off by little more than a fire ring and a splintered picnic table, spaced just far enough apart that you can hear your neighbours' conversations without quite making out the words. Your father parks the car at an angle, then begins unloading the canvas tent from where it's been strapped to the roof, laying out the poles and stakes across the dirt with the methodical patience of someone who has done this exact task many times before, though never quite perfectly. You and your sibling are given the job of gathering kindling, wandering a short distance into the trees at the edge of the site, searching for dry twigs and fallen branches small enough to snap easily underfoot. The forest floor here is soft with fallen needles, and the air smells sharply of pine sap and damp earth, a scent entirely different from the vinyl and highway smell that's filled your senses for most of the day. You return with armfuls of sticks, proud of the small contribution, dropping them beside the fire ring your father has already cleared of old ash. The tent goes up slowly, your father muttering instructions to himself as he threads poles through canvas loops, occasionally calling your mother over to hold one side steady while he works out some stubborn knot in the guy line. It never quite goes up as easily as it seems like it should, the canvas sagging unevenly at first, one corner refusing to sit flush against the ground, but eventually, after enough adjustment, the whole structure rises into something resembling a proper shelter, sturdy enough to trust for the night ahead. Your mother, meanwhile, sets up the small camp stove on the picnic table, arranging cans and pots with the same quiet efficiency she brings to every task on this trip. She lights the citronella candles as the light starts to fade, small glass jars flickering to life at each corner of the site, their sharp, slightly medicinal scent mixing with the smoke that's just beginning to curl up from the fire your father has finally coaxed into being. As dusk deepens, the whole campground seems to shift into a different mood entirely. Voices growing quieter, the clatter of pots and pans softening into the low murmur of families settling in for the evening. Somewhere nearby, another family's radio plays faintly, barely audible over the crackle of your own fire, and the first few stars begin to appear overhead, faint at first, then gradually sharper as the sky continues to darken. Dinner tonight is simple: canned beans warmed over the camp stove, hot dogs speared on sticks and held carefully over the fire until the skin blisters and browns just right. You eat sitting on a fallen log dragged close to the fire ring, plate balanced on your knees, the warmth of the flames pressing pleasantly against your face while the cooler evening air settles against your back. There's a particular satisfaction to a meal eaten this way, unhurried, slightly smoky, tasting better somehow than it would at any table back home. Your father pokes at the fire occasionally, adjusting logs, sending small showers of sparks up into the darkening sky, and your mother wipes down the picnic table with a practiced hand, keeping the site tidy even out here in the woods. The citronella candles continue their steady, flickering work, and for the most part the mosquitoes stay at bay, only the occasional buzzing intruder breaking through to interrupt the peaceful hum of the evening. As full darkness settles over the campground, the fire becomes the natural centre of attention, its light throwing long, shifting shadows against the canvas of the tent behind you. Conversation slows to occasional murmurs, everyone content simply to watch the flames, listening to the distant sounds of other families settling into their own evenings scattered throughout the trees. It is the kind of evening that asks very little of you. No schedule, no destination, just a fire, a tent, and the slow, steady work of settling into a place for the night. And it carries a particular kind of peace that's harder to find these days, when campgrounds come with electrical hookups and glowing screens, rather than simply firelight and the sharp, comforting smell of citronella drifting quietly through the dark. Once the fire is going and the last of dinner has been cleared away, someone always starts humming something, and it isn't long before the whole family is singing half-remembered verses to songs nobody quite knows all the words to. The fire pops and shifts, and for a little while nobody minds that the harmony isn't very good. It usually starts small, almost accidentally, your mother humming quietly to herself as she stacks the last of the dinner plates, some tune from her own childhood that seems to surface without her fully intending it. Your father picks it up a beat later, adding a low, rumbling harmony that doesn't quite match but somehow fits anyway, and before long the two of them are singing an actual verse together, filling in the words they remember and mumbling through the ones they don't. You and your sibling join in tentatively at first, unsure of the melody, catching only fragments of the lyrics, but the fire has a way of loosening everyone's inhibitions, and soon enough you're both singing along at full volume, getting half the words wrong and not caring in the slightest. The songs themselves drift from old hymns to popular tunes from the radio, to something your father claims his own father used to sing, though nobody's entirely sure if he's remembering it correctly or simply making up new verses as he goes. The fire crackles and pops between verses, sending up small embers that drift briefly into the darkness before winking out, and the light it throws catches everyone's faces in a warm, flickering glow, turning even the most ordinary expressions into something that feels almost cinematic. Your mother's voice carries clearest of anyone's, steady and true, even when she's forgotten the words, filling the gaps with a soft, wordless hum until the next line comes back to her. Somewhere in the middle of a song, your father breaks into an exaggerated off-key solo just to make everyone laugh, and it works exactly as intended. The whole family dissolving into giggles that interrupt the song entirely for a moment, before someone picks the thread back up and carries it forward. These interruptions become as much a part of the tradition as the songs themselves, small moments of pure silliness that somehow deepen the warmth of the whole evening, rather than detracting from it. Across the campground, you can hear other families engaged in their own versions of the same ritual, faint singing drifting through the trees, mixing with your own in a way that makes the whole place feel connected. Dozens of small fires and dozens of small choirs, all doing roughly the same thing under the same darkening sky. Occasionally a burst of laughter from some other site travels clearly through the night air, and you wonder briefly what joke prompted it, before returning your attention to your own family's fire. As the songs continue, the mood shifts gradually from playful to something quieter, more reflective, the upbeat tunes giving way eventually to slower ones, your mother's voice softening into something almost like a lullaby, even though nobody's quite ready for bed yet. You find yourself staring into the flames rather than at your family's faces, mesmerized by the shifting orange and blue at the base of the fire, only half listening now, more absorbing the sound than actively singing along. Your father adds another log to the fire and it catches slowly, crackling louder for a moment before settling back into a steady burn, and the singing continues in fits and starts, never quite ending cleanly, simply fading in and out as everyone's energy ebbs and flows with the length of the evening. Somewhere in there, without anyone quite marking the transition, the singing stops altogether, replaced by comfortable silence, the fire itself now doing most of the talking, its steady crackle the only sound left besides the occasional distant call of some night bird settling into the trees. You lean back against the log you're sitting on, full from dinner, slightly hoarse from singing, watching sparks rise up into a sky thick with more stars than you ever see back home, no streetlights out here to compete with them. Your sibling has gone quiet beside you, eyes heavy, and your mother reaches over instinctively to smooth their hair back from their forehead, a small automatic gesture of comfort. It is the kind of evening that leaves no recording behind, no photograph capable of capturing it properly, just the memory of a fire, some half-remembered songs, and the particular unrepeatable harmony of a family singing slightly out of tune together, under an open sky, in a way that television and radio and every other form of entertainment back home never quite managed to replace. You've been in the car for hours, restless and half asleep, when the road suddenly opens onto an overlook, and your father pulls over without a word. Everyone climbs out in near silence, drawn to the railing, because there are some views that simply require you to stop talking for a moment. The transition happens almost without warning, the road curving around a final bend, trees falling away on either side, and suddenly the whole car fills with a kind of hushed anticipation as the landscape opens up ahead. Your father doesn't announce anything, doesn't ask if anyone wants to stop, He simply eases the car onto the gravel shoulder and cuts the engine, and in that sudden absence of road noise, the whole world seems to hold its breath along with you. You climb out slowly, legs still stiff from sitting, and the air here feels different immediately. Thinner somehow, carrying a chill that wasn't present down on the valley floor. A low wooden railing marks the edge of the overlook, weathered grey by years of sun and rain. And beyond it the land drops away into something vast and layered, ridge after ridge fading into a soft blue haze that stretches all the way to the horizon. Nobody says much at first. Your mother walks slowly toward the railing, one hand pressed lightly against her chest, and simply stands there looking out, the wind catching loose strands of her hair. Your father follows a step behind, hands in his pockets, quiet in a way that feels entirely different from his usual quiet. This one waited with something closer to reverence. Even you and your sibling, usually incapable of standing still for more than a few seconds, find yourselves simply staring, caught by the sheer scale of what's spread out below. The view itself defies easy description. Layers of mountains or canyon walls or forested valleys receding into the distance, each ridge a slightly paler shade of blue than the one in front of it, until the farthest visible line blurs almost indistinguishably into the sky itself. A hawk drifts on some updraft far below the level of the overlook, riding the air currents in slow, patient circles, and you watch it for a long moment, struck by the strange sensation of looking down at a bird in flight rather than up. The silence up here has a texture to it that's different from any silence back home. Not empty exactly, but full of small sounds you wouldn't normally notice. Wind moving through nearby pines, the distant, echoing call of some bird you can't identify, the occasional creak of the wooden railing as someone shifts their weight against it. There's no traffic noise this far from the nearest town, no hum of electricity, nothing but the wind and the vast layered landscape stretching out in every direction. Your father finally breaks the silence, his voice quieter than usual, pointing out some feature in the distance, a particular ridge or a river cutting through the valley floor far below, and your mother nods slowly, still mostly lost in her own thoughts. You lean against the railing beside your sibling, both of you quiet now, the earlier restlessness of the car ride entirely forgotten, replaced by something closer to genuine awe, even if neither of you would have used that word at the time. A few other cars pull into the overlook while you're standing there, other families stepping out to take in the same view, nodding politely to one another, sharing in the same unspoken understanding that this particular stop deserves a certain reverence. Someone snaps a photograph nearby, the shutter click barely audible over the wind, and you wonder whether any photograph could actually capture what it feels like to stand here. The scale of the place pressing in on you in a way that a flat two-dimensional image never quite manages. Eventually, after a stretch of time none of you bother to measure, your father glances at his watch and suggests gently that you should probably get back on the road if you want to reach the next town before dark. Nobody argues, though nobody moves particularly quickly either, each of you taking one last look before turning back toward the car, carrying some small wordless piece of the view along with you. It is the kind of moment that resists easy summary, one of those brief pauses in a long journey that ends up meaning far more than the miles that surrounded it. A single overlook, a few silent minutes, and a view vast enough to make an entire restless car full of children fall quiet all at once, if only for a little while. In the evening, a park ranger gathers a small crowd around a fire circle, flashlight in hand, and begins talking about the wildlife and the history of the land in a voice built for exactly this kind of gathering. You sit cross-legged on the ground, chin in your hands, half listening and half watching. The sparks rise into the dark. The amphitheatre, if it can even be called that, is really just a cleared circle of dirt ringed by low wooden benches, a modest fire pit at its centre, already crackling by the time your family arrives and finds a spot near the back. Families trickle in from various directions, following the same worn paths through the campground, children in pyjamas already, clutching stuffed animals or flashlights of their own, parents carrying folding chairs or simply settling onto the benches with the weary contentment of people who've spent the whole day outdoors. The ranger himself cuts an easy, confident figure, dressed in a khaki uniform that's seen plenty of wear, a wide-brimmed hat pushed back slightly on his head, a flashlight clipped to his belt that he hasn't turned on yet since the fire still provides enough light to see by. He waits patiently for the crowd to settle, chatting quietly with a few of the closer families, before finally clearing his throat and beginning in earnest, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry across the circle without shouting. He starts with something local, a story about the particular animals that call this stretch of land home, describing the habits of raccoons that raid campsites after dark, or the elk that sometimes wander through the meadow at the edge of the park at dawn, their antlers catching the early light in a way he describes so vividly you can almost picture it despite never having seen one yourself. A few children in the front row lean forward, eyes wide, clearly hoping an elk might wander through the fire circle itself at any moment. From there, the ranger moves into history, talking about the people who lived on this land long before it became a park, the settlers who passed through in wagons, the geological forces that carved out the canyons and ridges you drove past earlier in the day. His voice carries the practiced rhythm of someone who's given this same talk hundreds of times before, and yet there's genuine enthusiasm behind it too, a real fondness for the material that keeps it from ever feeling rote. You watch the fire more than you watch him, honestly, mesmerized by the way the flames shift and curl, sending up small showers of sparks that rise briefly into the darkening sky before disappearing entirely. Every so often a log shifts and settles with a soft crack, and the sound seems to punctuate the ranger's sentences in a way that feels almost intentional, though of course it isn't. Your sibling has curled up against your mother's side at some point, eyelids growing heavy despite trying to follow along with the story, and your father sits with his forearms resting on his knees, listening with real attention, occasionally nodding along at some particular detail that catches his interest. The whole crowd has settled into that particular comfortable stillness that only exists around a shared fire at the end of a long day, nobody in any hurry to be anywhere else. The ranger eventually pulls out his flashlight, clicking it on to illustrate some point about nocturnal animals, sweeping the beam briefly across the surrounding trees to demonstrate how eyes might reflect back at you in the dark if you're lucky, or unlucky, enough to encounter something out there after the talk ends. A few children gasp when a pair of eyes actually does flash briefly at the edge of the beam, though the ranger assures everyone, laughing, that it's almost certainly just a deer, nothing to worry about. As the talk winds down, he answers a few questions from the crowd, patient with even the youngest, most rambling inquiries, and offers a final reminder about campground safety, keeping food stored properly, staying close to your tent after dark. The fire has burned down to a lower, steadier glow by now, and the crowd begins to disperse slowly, families gathering up their children and folding chairs, murmuring quiet goodnights to the ranger and to each other as they head back toward their own scattered campsites. Your father lifts your sleeping sibling up into his arms as you all rise to leave, and you walk back through the dark campground together, flashlight beams bobbing along the path ahead of you, the ranger's voice and the images he conjured still lingering pleasantly in your mind. Somewhere behind you, the fire circle glows faintly through the trees, the last few stragglers still lingering near its warmth. It is the kind of evening entertainment that required no screen, no admission fee, nothing but a fire, a knowledgeable voice, and a small crowd of tired families willing to sit quietly together in the dark, and it left behind something that no rerun or recording ever quite manages to replicate. The particular flickering memory of sparks rising into a sky full of stars you'd never see quite so clearly back home. On the hottest afternoon of the trip, you find a swimming hole just off the highway, marked only by a few parked cars and a rope swing hanging from a tree. You wade in fully clothed at first, then peel off your shoes, and for an hour the whole trip is forgotten in favour of cold water and sunlight on the surface. You'd notice the cars first. 3 or 4 of them pulled haphazardly onto a strip of gravel, with no sign to explain why anyone would stop in the middle of nowhere. And then you'd notice the sound. Faint shouts and splashing carried on the breeze through the open car windows. Your father slows almost instinctively, following the sound the way you might follow a scent, and finds a spot to park among the other cars without anyone having to ask whether you should stop. A worn path leads down through the trees, packed dirt polished smooth by years of bare feet, and the temperature seems to drop with every step closer to the water, the air growing damp and cool even before the swimming hole comes into view. When it finally does, it's smaller than you expected, but somehow more inviting for it. A wide, dark pool cut into the rock, fed by some unseen current. The water so clear near the edges you can see straight down to smooth stones resting on the bottom. A thick rope hangs from a branch stretched out over the deepest part of the pool, knotted at the bottom for gripping, swaying gently even when nobody's using it. A few older boys take turns with it, running and launching themselves out over the water in wide, hollering arcs, before dropping with a splash loud enough to send ripples all the way to the far bank. You watch them with a mixture of admiration and nervousness, wondering if you'll work up the courage to try it yourself before the afternoon's over. Your mother settles onto a flat rock near the shore, unpacking a towel she'd thought to bring along, already fanning herself in the heat even in the shade of the trees. Your father wades in first, rolling his pant legs up, though it does little good, wincing at the cold before submitting to it fully, laughing at himself in a way you rarely see him laugh back home. You and your sibling follow close behind, still in your clothes, the water shockingly cold against sun-warmed skin, drawing a gasp from both of you at once. Within a few minutes, the clothes come off down to what your mother allows, shoes abandoned on the bank alongside hers, and the whole family settles into the water properly, wading out until it reaches your chest, feet searching for purchase on the smooth, slick stones underfoot. The heat of the afternoon that had felt so oppressive back in the car simply dissolves out here, replaced by the particular, all-consuming relief of cold water against overheated skin. You paddle out toward the deeper section where the rope hangs, watching the older boys take their turns, gathering nerve with each pass. Eventually you work up the courage to try it yourself, gripping the knot with both hands, running as far back as the bank allows before launching out over the water, stomach lurching with that particular thrill of weightlessness before the rope reaches its arc and you let go, dropping into the cold water with a splash that feels like a genuine triumph. Your sibling watches from the shallows, not quite brave enough yet, but cheering loudly all the same, and you swim back toward them, grinning, water streaming from your hair. Your father tries the rope once too, more for show than anything, drawing a good-natured laugh from the other families nearby when he lands with far less grace than the teenagers had managed. Time seems to lose all shape out here, the afternoon stretching wide and unhurried, marked only by the rhythm of swimming, floating, climbing back up onto sun-warmed rocks to dry off before diving back in again. Your mother eventually joins the water herself, wading in slowly, laughing as the cold hits her, and for a stretch of time the whole family simply floats together near the centre of the pool, unconcerned with schedules or highways or How many more miles remain before the day is done? Dragonflies skim low across the surface near the shaded edges, and somewhere overhead a woodpecker works steadily at some unseen tree, the sound echoing faintly through the little canyon that holds the swimming hole in its cool green shadow. You float on your back for a while, staring up at patches of sky visible through the canopy, feeling entirely, thoroughly at peace in a way that's hard to come by anywhere else on a trip like this. Eventually, reluctantly, your father calls everyone back toward the shore, checking his watch with the same apologetic expression he always wears when the fun has to end for practical reasons. You climb out slowly, skin pruned, hair dripping, and towel off on the flat rocks while your clothes dry in patches from the ride still ahead. Walking back up the path toward the car, damp and cool and entirely content, the heat of the highway waiting beyond the trees seems almost bearable now, softened by the hour just spent forgetting it existed at all. It is the kind of stop that never appears on any map. No name, no address, just a rope swing and a cold, clear pool discovered by following the sound of other people's laughter, and it remains, even now, one of the purest memories the whole trip has to offer. As dusk settles on one of the last nights of the trip, you pull into a drive-in theatre, parking in rows facing a giant screen glowing white against the darkening sky. You're in pyjamas already, propped against pillows in the back seat, and the movie feels less important than the popcorn and the warm night air drifting through the open window. The lot fills slowly as the light fades, car after car easing into position along the gravel rows, headlights dimming one by one until the only real illumination left comes from the concession stand glowing softly at the edge of the field, and the enormous blank screen looming pale against the darkening horizon. Your father maneuvers the car carefully into a spot with a clear view, adjusting the angle twice before he's satisfied, and cuts the engine, leaving the windows rolled partway down to let in the cooling evening air. You changed into pyjamas back at the motel before leaving, your mother insisting there was no reason to stay dressed for something you'd mostly be watching from a nest of pillows and blankets in the back seat. Now you're settled in properly, propped against the door with a pillow behind your back, a blanket pulled loosely over your legs despite the warmth still lingering from the day, simply because it feels right. The particular coziness required for watching a movie from inside your own car. Your father makes the walk to the concession stand alone, returning some minutes later with a cardboard tray loaded down with popcorn, a box of candy your sibling had been begging for since you first spotted the drive-in sign from the highway, and a few bottles of soda that sweat immediately in the warm night air. The popcorn smells like butter and salt in a way that fills the whole car, and you dig in before the movie's even started, fingers already greasy, entirely unconcerned about it. The speaker, an old metal box hung on the window frame, crackles faintly with static before the pre-show announcements begin. Cheerful jingles reminding everyone to visit the snack bar, cartoon hot dogs dancing across the screen in grainy, faded colour. Around you, other families settle into their own rituals. The murmur of distant conversations drifting between cars, a baby fussing somewhere a few rows over before quieting down, someone's screen door of a station wagon creaking open and shut as a family rearranges their own blankets and pillows. The sky above continues its slow transformation, the last traces of orange sinking below the horizon, stars beginning to prick through the deepening blue, faint at first, and then gradually sharper as full darkness settles in. The screen glows brighter now against the black sky, and a hush falls gradually over the whole lot as the actual movie finally begins, the tinny sound crackling from the speaker box, slightly out of sync with the picture in a way nobody seems to mind. You watch for a while, genuinely absorbed, though your attention drifts periodically toward the popcorn, toward your sibling already half asleep against the far door, toward the strange, quiet spectacle of dozens of cars all facing the same enormous, glowing screen in unison. Headlights dark, occupants scattered across seats and hoods, and the open trunks of station wagons parked at the very back. Your mother reaches back at some point to smooth a blanket more securely over your sibling, who has stopped even pretending to watch, curled up instead with the particular boneless ease that only very tired children manage. Your father keeps one arm slung casually along the top of the front seat, glancing back occasionally to check on all of you, clearly more interested in the fact that everyone's comfortable than in the plot unfolding on the screen ahead. The night air drifting through the cracked window carries the mingled smell of popcorn, distant charcoal from someone grilling at their tailgate, and the particular dry, dusty scent of a gravel lot that's held onto the day's heat, even as the temperature slowly drops. Somewhere behind you, another family's radio hums faintly, tuned to the same audio frequency, and for a strange moment 2 different cars' worth of dialogue overlap slightly, before fading back into their own separate rhythms. By the time the movie reaches its midpoint, you've stopped following the story closely, more absorbed now in the simple pleasure of the whole setup. Pillows and blankets and the glow of the screen reflected faintly in the windshield, your sibling fully asleep, your parents murmuring quietly to each other in the front seat about nothing in particular. The popcorn box sits mostly empty between you, and you lean your head back against the pillow, eyes growing heavy despite your best efforts to stay awake for the ending. The last thing you remember clearly is the screen's light flickering across the ceiling of the car and your mother's voice, soft, telling your father she thinks the kids are down for the count, followed by his quiet laugh, and then very little else. Sleep arriving somewhere in that last stretch of movie you'll never actually remember watching. It is the kind of night that blurs pleasantly at the edges even as it's happening. Part cinema, part camping, entirely unlike sitting in any ordinary theatre, and it leaves behind not so much a memory of the film itself as the memory of falling asleep surrounded by family, popcorn, and 100 other cars all quietly doing the exact same thing under the same wide star-filled sky. At some roadside stop, in the space of what feels like 30 seconds, someone goes missing, and your mother's calm voice turns sharp as she moves quickly between the aisles. The relief when your brother is found crouched by the postcard rack, utterly unbothered, floods through the whole family at once. The stop itself had seemed entirely unremarkable up until that moment. Just another gas station and gift shop combination along the highway, the kind you'd passed a dozen times already without much thought. Your father had pulled in for fuel, your mother had gone inside to use the restroom and pick up a few snacks, and the rest of you had scattered loosely around the small shop, drawn toward different shelves, different distractions, nobody paying particularly close attention to anyone else. It's your mother who notices first, emerging from the restroom and doing the quick automatic head count that parents seem to perform constantly without ever announcing it, and coming up one short. At first she assumes he's simply out of sight behind a shelf, and she calls his name once, casually, expecting an answer that doesn't come. The second call carries a slightly different edge to it, sharper, and you feel the shift in the air immediately, the particular quality of alarm that spreads through a family before anyone's even said the word missing out loud. Your father hears it from where he's paying for gas at the counter, and is at your mother's side within seconds, both of them moving quickly now between the aisles, checking behind displays of postcards and snow globes, calling your brother's name with increasing urgency. You feel your own stomach tighten, some instinctive fear rising, even though rationally you know he can't have gone far. The shop itself is small, there's nowhere really to disappear to. 30 seconds stretch out enormously in moments like this, each one carrying its own small weight of dread. Your mother's voice no longer casual at all now, calling out sharply, checking with the woman behind the register whether she's seen a small boy wander anywhere. The shopkeeper straightens, alert, glancing around the store herself, and for a moment the whole small space seems to hold its breath along with your family. Then, from behind a rotating wire rack near the far corner of the shop, comes the sound of humming, quiet and completely unbothered, and your mother rounds the display to find your brother crouched down on the floor, entirely absorbed in spinning the postcard rack slowly, examining each image as it passes with the focused concentration only a young child can bring to something so simple. He looks up at her, mildly surprised by the commotion, utterly unaware that he'd caused any alarm at all. The relief that floods through your mother is almost visible, her shoulders dropping, her breath releasing in a long exhale as she crouches down to gather him into a hug that's half comfort and half quiet reprimand. Your father arrives a beat later, relief washing over his face too, though he covers it quickly with a firmer tone, reminding your brother that he needs to stay where the family can see him, that wandering off like that isn't something he can do. Your brother, for his part, seems entirely unbothered by the whole ordeal, more interested in showing everyone the postcard he'd been examining when they found him. A picture of some roadside attraction from a town none of you have ever heard of. He holds it up proudly, and despite the fear that had gripped the family only moments before, there's something almost comic about the mismatch between his calm and everyone else's residual anxiety. The shopkeeper, watching the whole reunion unfold, offers a small, sympathetic smile, the kind that suggests she's seen this exact scene play out more times than she could count. Children wandering off in the space of a distracted moment, parents scrambling, and then the swift anticlimactic resolution that always seems to follow. She rings up the postcard along with your mother's snacks, waving off the apology your mother offers for the commotion. Back in the car a few minutes later, the mood has shifted only slightly. Your mother holding your brother's hand a little more firmly than usual as you all walk back across the lot. Your father glancing back twice just to reassure himself everyone's actually accounted for this time. The relief lingers in the car for a while afterward. Nobody saying much about it directly, though your mother reaches back once more to touch your brother's knee, as if reassuring herself he's really there. It is the kind of fright that passes almost as quickly as it arrives. 30 seconds of genuine panic dissolved instantly into relief and mild, affectionate exasperation, and yet it lodges itself firmly into the memory of the trip anyway. One of those brief, sharp moments that reminds you, even amid all the games and songs and lazy afternoons, just how much weight a family carries for each other without ever really discussing it out loud. There's a particular sadness that settles over the last full day of a trip, even before anyone says it out loud. The same beach or the same mountain view looks a little different now, knowing that tomorrow the car will be pointed the other way, back toward home and school and everything waiting there. You wake up that morning in the same motel room you've woken up in for the past 2 nights, and yet something about the light coming through the curtains feels different, heavier somehow, weighted with the knowledge that this is the last time you'll wake up here, the last time this particular view of a parking lot on a distant highway will be the first thing you see. Nobody mentions it directly, but the awareness moves through the whole family quietly, a shared understanding that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Breakfast happens a little slower than usual, your mother lingering a bit longer over her coffee, your father studying the road atlas with less urgency than the earlier days of the trip, as though delaying the moment when the map becomes only about the drive home rather than the drive towards somewhere new. You push your eggs around your plate, feeling the particular unnamed heaviness that settles over the last day of anything good, a sadness that has no clear cause beyond the simple fact that it's ending. The day's activities carry on largely as they had before, another walk along the same stretch of beach, Another look at the same mountain view from the same overlook you'd first discovered days earlier, and yet everything feels subtly different now, coloured by the knowledge that tomorrow you won't be here at all. The waves seem to carry a different sound. The mountain view seems to demand a longer, more careful look, as if trying to memorise it well enough to carry the image home intact. Your sibling seems to feel it too, quieter than usual, wandering along the shoreline collecting shells with unusual concentration, as though gathering enough small physical proof of the trip might somehow extend it a little longer. You find yourself doing something similar, running your hand along the same rocks you'd barely noticed on the first day, trying to fix the exact texture of them in your memory before you lose the chance entirely. Your father takes more photographs today than he has the rest of the trip combined, angling the family against the same backdrop from several different positions, as though extra pictures might somehow compensate for the fact that tomorrow this particular place will exist only in memory and photograph, nowhere else. Your mother watches the ocean, or the mountains, or whatever view has anchored this stretch of the trip, with an expression that's hard to read, somewhere between contentment and quiet mourning. Lunch is eaten at the same little stand you discovered on the first day, and the food tastes almost nostalgic already, even though you're still sitting right there eating it. The strange sensation of missing something before it's even actually gone. Conversation drifts at various points toward home, your father mentioning something about work waiting for him, your mother noting that school starts again soon. Small, practical reminders of the ordinary life that's been paused these past 2 weeks, and will soon resume in full. In the late afternoon you find yourself sitting quietly at the edge of whatever view has defined this stop, not really doing anything, just watching, trying to hold on to the particular quality of light, the particular smell of salt or pine or desert dust that's become so familiar over the past several days and will, by tomorrow evening, exist only as a memory competing against 100 other memories from 100 other places. Your father joins you eventually, sitting down without saying much, simply looking out at the same view alongside you. There's a comfort in that quiet, matched attention. 2 people watching the same thing, both aware of what tomorrow holds, neither needing to discuss it directly. He puts a hand briefly on your shoulder, and you understand, without him saying anything, that he feels the same particular ache you do, the reluctance to let a good thing end, as the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in the kind of colours that feel almost too vivid to be real. The whole family gathers instinctively in the same spot, watching together. Nobody speaking much, all of you simply absorbing the last full evening of a trip that's meant more than any of you might easily put into words. Your mother reaches for your father's hand. Your sibling leans quietly against your side. It is the kind of sadness that has no real solution, no way to extend a trip beyond its natural end. And yet there's something almost sweet buried inside it too. The recognition that a thing worth mourning is, by definition, a thing worth having had in the first place. And tomorrow, however much you dread it, will simply be another day, carrying this one quietly along inside it. And then, almost without warning, it's the last day, and the car is pointed back the way you came. The mood is different now, quieter, softer around the edges. Nobody's counting license plates anymore. Everyone is simply watching the road unspool behind you, already feeling the trip becoming a memory before it's even finished. The morning had started much like every other morning of the trip. Suitcases carried out to the car, the trunk packed with the same careful, practiced choreography your father has performed at every stop along the way. But there's a different quality to it now, a kind of finality in the way he closes the trunk, a heaviness in your mother's voice as she does her last walk-through of the motel room, checking under beds and behind curtains for anything left behind. You climb into the back seat one final time, and the vinyl feels the same as it did that first morning so many days ago, warm from the sun, still faintly carrying that particular smell that's come to mean vacation more than any single place you've visited. Except now it means something slightly different too, an ending stitched invisibly into the same familiar sensation. The recognition that after today, this smell will simply mean the drive home, nothing more. The highway unspools the same way it always has, telephone poles clicking past in that same hypnotic rhythm, fields and farmhouses drifting by exactly as they did on the way out. And yet nobody reaches for the license plate game today. Nobody presses their forehead eagerly to the glass looking for a rare, distant state. The games that filled so many hours on the way out here feel, somehow, beside the point now, replaced instead by a quieter kind of watching, everyone simply absorbing the last of the scenery slipping past. Your mother's road atlas stays closed on her lap for long stretches, the route home so familiar now, retraced rather than discovered, that there's little need to trace it with her finger the way she had on the way out. Your father drives with the same relaxed grip on the wheel, though his eyes seem to linger a little longer on certain landmarks you pass again in reverse. The same gravel turnout beside the lake, the same diner where you'd stopped for lunch what feels like a lifetime ago rather than just over a week. You watch the world through the window with a different kind of attention now, not searching for anything new, simply saying a quiet, private goodbye to the landscape that's carried you through so many hours of the trip. The fields look the same as they did on the way out here, and yet knowing you're moving away from something rather than toward it changes the way the light falls across them, changes the particular ache that settles in your chest as mile markers count down instead of up. Conversation in the car is sparser than usual, not from any tension, simply from the particular quiet that settles over a family coming to the end of something meaningful together. Your sibling leans against the window, watching the same fields blur past that had once seemed so full of promise, and you find yourself, unexpectedly, missing the trip even while you're still technically inside it. A strange kind of nostalgia for something that hasn't quite finished happening yet. Somewhere around midday, you pass through the same small town where you'd stopped that first afternoon. The same diner with its faded striped awning visible briefly from the highway, and your father slows very slightly, as though considering whether to stop again, before deciding against it and continuing on. Nobody comments, though you catch your mother glancing at it too, a small wistful expression crossing her face before she turns her attention back to the road ahead. The afternoon stretches on in that same quiet rhythm, the radio playing softly, nobody arguing over territory in the backseat today, the earlier squabbles of the trip feeling impossibly distant now, small and unimportant against the larger, gentler sadness of an ending. Even the boredom feels different, softer somehow, less restless than it had on the way out, more contemplative, everyone quietly aware that this particular stretch of highway will soon give way to familiar streets and the ordinary rhythm of home. As evening approaches and the first signs for your own town begin to appear, the mood in the car shifts once more, not quite back to normal, but towards something like acceptance, the quiet recognition that all good things eventually curve back toward the ordinary. That home itself carries its own comforts, even if none of them quite match the particular magic of the past 2 weeks. Your father turns onto the familiar street, and the house comes into view exactly as you left it, waiting patiently in the last of the evening light. It is the kind of ending that every trip like this eventually reaches, quieter than the beginning, softer around the edges, carrying within it both the relief of returning to something familiar and the small, persistent ache of leaving something wonderful behind. And it is exactly this rhythm, the going and the coming home again that made the whole journey what it was, a way of travelling and a way of loving a family that feels more and more like something we've quietly lost the knack for. The house looks exactly as you left it, and somehow that's the strangest part of all. The porch light still burning faintly against the dusk, the lawn slightly overgrown, the mail piled up behind the glass storm door in a way that makes the whole street feel like it barely noticed you were gone. Your father cuts the engine in the driveway, and for a moment nobody moves, all of you simply sitting there in the settling quiet, listening to the tick of the engine cooling. There's a strange kind of disorientation in stepping out of the car after so many days on the road, your legs remembering the motion of the highway even though the driveway beneath your feet is perfectly still. The evening air smells different here, familiar in a way that catches you off guard. Cut grass and the neighbour's charcoal grill and something distinctly like your own house. A scent you'd never noticed before because you'd never been away from it long enough to smell it fresh. Your mother unlocks the front door and steps inside first, flicking on lights room by room, and the house seems to exhale around her, shaking off the stillness of 2 empty weeks. The furniture sits exactly where you left it, and yet everything looks subtly smaller somehow, quieter, as though the rooms themselves had been holding their breath the whole time you were gone and are only now settling back into their ordinary shape. You wander through the hallway, trailing one hand along the wall, the way you had the night before you left, except now the gesture carries a different weight entirely, less a goodbye and more a quiet greeting. Your own room looks exactly as you left it, bed still slightly rumpled from that last morning, and there's something almost dizzying about how unchanged it all is, as if 2 weeks of diners and swimming holes and campfires had happened to a slightly different version of yourself, one who is only now stepping back into this familiar body. Your father carries suitcases in from the car one at a time, setting them down in the hallway with far less ceremony than the careful packing that had preceded the whole trip. The puzzle of loading now simply reversed into a pile waiting to be sorted through tomorrow. The cooler comes in last, mostly melted ice sloshing faintly inside, and your mother empties it into the kitchen sink with a practiced motion, already sliding back into the rhythms of home even before she's fully unpacked. Dinner that first night back is simple. Whatever can be assembled quickly from a mostly empty refrigerator, and you eat it at the kitchen table rather than a diner booth or a picnic bench, the ordinary chairs feeling almost unfamiliar after so many nights spent perched on motel furniture or fallen logs. Conversation is quieter than it's been in days, everyone a little tired, a little wrung out from the drive, content simply to sit together in a kitchen that smells like home rather than highway. After dinner you wander out to the front step and sit there for a while in the deepening dark, watching the neighbourhood settle into its evening rhythm, a sprinkler ticking somewhere down the block, a screen door banging shut 2 houses over. Sounds so ordinary they'd become entirely invisible before the trip, and now, freshly returned, feel almost worth noticing again. There's a particular comfort in recognising your own street, your own porch light, your own patch of sky glimpsed between familiar rooftops. Your father joins you on the step eventually, saying little, simply sitting beside you in the dark the way he'd sat beside you at that overlook so many days ago, watching a different kind of view now, nothing more than a quiet suburban street. And yet there's a similar stillness to it, the same unhurried togetherness that had marked so many of the best moments of the whole trip. Upstairs, later, you lie in your own bed for the first time in 2 weeks, and the mattress feels different beneath you, softer in some ways, stranger in others, your body still faintly expecting the particular sway and hum of a car in motion. The ceiling above you is your own ceiling, familiar in every crack and shadow, and yet you find yourself missing, just slightly, the canvas roof of a tent or the flickering light thrown by a campfire. Somewhere down the hall you can hear your parents' voices, low and unhurried, already talking about ordinary things, work waiting tomorrow, a bill that needs paying, the specific rhythm of a household settling back into its usual gears. And yet beneath the ordinary conversation, you can hear something else too, a satisfaction in their voices, the quiet contentment of two people who took their family somewhere and brought them safely home again. It is the kind of homecoming that happens in every family in every summer, largely unremarked upon and yet quietly significant all the same. The strange sensation of a familiar house suddenly needing to be rediscovered after 2 weeks away. And it carries its own particular comfort, different from anything the trip itself offered, the simple, grounding relief of being exactly where you belong. Nearly 3 weeks after you've returned, a thick envelope arrives from the drugstore and the whole family gathers around the kitchen table to see the trip finally rendered in glossy, slightly overexposed colour. Your mother slides the photographs out carefully, one at a time, and the room fills with exclamations and corrections as everyone remembers the same moments slightly differently. The wait itself had become its own small ritual. Your father checking the drugstore counter every few days on his way home from work, always coming back empty-handed until finally one evening he walks through the door holding the thick paper envelope like it's something precious, and the whole family abandons whatever they'd been doing to gather around the table immediately. There's a particular anticipation in that moment, the trip itself already fading slightly at the edges in memory, about to be fixed permanently into something you can hold in your hands. Your mother opens the envelope carefully, sliding out the stack of photographs along with the negatives tucked into their own thin paper sleeve, and begins laying them out one by one across the kitchen table, like she's dealing an enormous, sprawling hand of cards. The first few are a little blurry, your father's early attempts at capturing the packed car in the driveway the night before you left, and everyone laughs at how serious and concentrated he looks in one shot, caught candidly by your mother without his knowledge. The photographs unfold roughly in order, the diner with its striped awning, your sibling grinning beside the world's largest ball of twine, a slightly overexposed shot of the overlook that somehow fails entirely to capture the scale of what you'd actually seen with your own eyes. Your father studies that one for a long moment, shaking his head slightly, insisting the real view was far more impressive than the photograph manages to suggest, and everyone around the table nods in agreement, understanding exactly what he means. There's a particular pleasure in seeing yourself frozen at some specific, half-forgotten moment, standing awkwardly beside the concrete dinosaur, wading into the swimming hole with your shirt still on, asleep against the car window with your mouth slightly open, in a way that makes your sibling laugh so hard they nearly fall out of their chair. You protest, embarrassed, snatching for the photograph, but your mother holds it just out of reach, laughing along, insisting it's one of the best pictures from the whole roll. Some photographs spark immediate competing memories. Your father certain a particular shot was taken at the second lake you stopped at rather than the first. Your mother equally certain of the opposite, the two of them bantering back and forth good-naturedly while you and your sibling watch, more interested in the pictures themselves than in settling the dispute. A few photographs remain mysteries entirely, blurred shapes nobody can quite identify, prompting theories about what exactly your father had been trying to capture in that particular frame. The stack slowly narrows as more photographs get set aside, propped up against the sugar bowl or the napkin holder for closer inspection. The kitchen table gradually transforming into something like a small makeshift gallery of the entire trip, laid out in glossy rectangles. Your mother keeps returning to one in particular, the whole family gathered at that fire circle for the Rangers' talk, faces lit warm and orange by the flames, and she studies it for a long moment before setting it carefully to the side, already deciding it belongs in a frame somewhere. You find yourself lingering over the photograph of the swimming hole, the rope swing caught mid-arc with your own small figure suspended above the water, and something about seeing it now fixed permanently on paper makes the whole memory feel both closer and further away at once, more solid somehow, but also unmistakably finished. A thing that happened, rather than a thing still happening. Your sibling reaches for the same photograph, wanting a closer look, and for a moment you both simply stare at it together in silence. By the time every photograph has been examined, argued over, and laughed about at least once, the kitchen table is scattered with glossy rectangles depicting nearly every stop along the whole 2 weeks, a paper trail leading from the packed driveway all the way back home again. Your mother begins gathering them up carefully, sorting them roughly by the order they were taken, already talking about which ones deserve a proper photo album and which ones might go into frames for the hallway. Your father leans back in his chair, coffee cup in hand, looking over the scattered photographs with quiet satisfaction, the particular pride of a man who planned a whole trip and brought his family through it successfully, now holding tangible proof of everywhere you'd been together. The evening stretches on a little longer than usual, nobody quite ready to clear the table, everyone still occasionally picking up one photograph or another for one more look before the whole collection finally gets tucked away. It is the kind of evening that modern life has quietly lost the shape of, the particular anticipation of waiting weeks for photographs to be developed, the shared discovery of the results all together around a kitchen table, memory and image arriving at the same time for the whole family at once, rather than scattered instantly across a dozen separate screens the moment the shutter clicks. By the time September rolls around, the trip has settled into something closer to legend than memory, retold and slightly embellished each time you tell it, and on the first day back at school, you find yourself the proud, temporary owner of the best summer vacation story in the whole classroom. The morning of the first day carries its own particular nervousness, new shoes still stiff, a fresh notebook smelling of paper and glue, the walk to school feeling longer than you remembered it being back in June. But underneath that ordinary first day anxiety runs a quieter thread of anticipation too. The knowledge that you're carrying something with you today that none of your classmates have, a whole trip's worth of stories waiting to be told the moment anyone asks what you did over summer. The teacher predictably asks exactly that question during the first morning's roundabout introduction, going desk by desk, and you sit up a little straighter when your turn finally arrives, already rehearsing in your head which parts of the trip deserve mentioning first. You settle on the swimming hole, describing the rope swing with real enthusiasm, watching a few classmates lean forward with genuine interest, and the retelling itself feels almost as satisfying as the original experience had been. At recess, the story expands further, details added and rearranged slightly with each new audience. The concrete dinosaur growing a little larger in the telling, the drive-in movie stretching a little longer, the 30 seconds of panic when your brother went missing transforming, in your version, into a far more dramatic ordeal than it had actually been at the time. Your friends listen with real attention, occasionally interrupting with their own competing stories, comparing swimming holes and roadside attractions the way children do, each one trying to top the last. You find yourself thinking about the trip differently now, filtered through the retelling, certain moments growing sharper and more vivid in memory, precisely because you've described them aloud so many times already, while other moments, the quiet ones, the ones that felt significant only in the moment itself, begin fading slightly at the edges, harder to put into words that would interest a schoolyard audience. The overlook, the singing around the campfire, these don't translate as easily into recess conversation as the concrete dinosaur does, and so they slip quietly into a different, more private category of memory. Your teacher assigns an essay that first week, the predictable "what I did this summer" prompt that every student in the school is probably writing some version of at this exact moment, and you find yourself genuinely excited to write it, filling page after page with details you'd nearly forgotten until the act of writing brought them back. The smell of citronella candles, the particular sound of the ranger's voice carrying across the fire circle, the cold shock of the swimming hole against sun-warmed skin. Writing it down changes the memory again, slightly, fixing certain details permanently onto paper while others, ones you don't happen to mention, begin drifting further into vagueness. You find yourself wondering, even as you write, which version of the trip you'll actually remember years from now. The lived experience itself, the retold schoolyard version, or this careful, slightly more polished written account sitting in front of you. At home that evening, you show your mother the finished essay, and she reads it slowly at the kitchen table, smiling at certain passages, her eyes going soft and distant at the description of the fire circle, the ranger's flashlight beam sweeping across the dark trees. She tells you it's good, really good, and asks if she can keep a copy, and something about her wanting to keep it makes the whole trip feel, suddenly, more permanent, more real, cemented now into two separate physical forms, photographs in an album and words on a page. Your father, when he gets home, reads it too, standing in the kitchen doorway with his tie still loosened from work, and he laughs out loud at the exaggerated account of your brother's disappearance in the gift shop, admitting it really had felt exactly that dramatic in the moment, even if it only lasted 30 seconds in reality. The whole family, gathered briefly in the kitchen over a single sheet of notebook paper, seems to relive the trip once more, together in miniature. As the fall settles in properly, the trip recedes gradually from daily conversation, replaced by the ordinary rhythms of school and homework and the changing weather outside, but it never quite disappears, resurfacing every so often in small, unexpected ways. A smell of citronella at a neighbour's barbecue, a rope swing spotted at some other lake on some other, smaller outing closer to home, each reminder pulling the whole trip briefly back into sharp focus before receding again into the general warmth of memory. It is the kind of story that every child of that era seemed to carry back to school each September, some version of a long car trip, a diner, an overlook, a swimming hole, told and retold until it became less a memory and more a small personal legend, one that would keep resurfacing in fragments for the rest of a life that eventually stopped taking trips quite like that one at all. Years later, on some entirely unremarkable evening, you find the photo album again, tucked into the bottom shelf of a closet you were cleaning out for some other reason entirely, and you sit down right there on the floor to look through it, the whole trip rising back up out of the pages exactly as vivid as it had been the summer you lived it. The album itself has aged the way these things do, its cover slightly faded, the plastic sleeves protecting each photograph gone a little cloudy and yellowed with time, but the images underneath remain remarkably clear, colours slightly muted now but still recognisable. The whole trip preserved in glossy rectangles exactly where your mother arranged them that evening around the kitchen table so many years ago. You'd forgotten somehow how carefully she'd organised them, each page telling its own small chapter of the journey. Sitting on the closet floor with the album open across your knees, you find yourself moving slowly through the pages, no longer in any hurry, studying details you'd barely noticed at the time. The exact colour of the car, the particular cut of your father's shirt, the way your mother's hair was styled that summer in a fashion that seems now unmistakably of its era. You linger over the photograph of the overlook, remembering suddenly, with real clarity, the particular quality of silence up there, the wind, the hawk circling below the level of the railing. Your own children, if you have them by now, might wander in at some point, curious about what's holding your attention so completely, and you find yourself explaining the photographs to them the way your own parents might have explained old photographs to you, pointing out the world's largest ball of twine, laughing again at how unimpressive it looks captured on film compared to how enormous it had felt standing beside it as a child. They listen with the mild, polite interest children reserve for their parents' old stories, not yet understanding why any of it matters so much to you. You find the photograph from the swimming hole, the rope swing frozen mid-arc, your own younger self suspended above the water, and something catches in your chest looking at it now. A strange mixture of nostalgia and something closer to grief. Not for anything lost exactly, but for the simple, unrepeatable specificity of that one particular afternoon, one particular summer. A version of your family that exists now only in this photograph and in the quickly fading corners of memory. The photograph of the whole family gathered around the campfire for the Rangers' talk stops you longest of all. Your parents younger in it than you can quite believe now. Your own face lit orange by the flames, caught mid-laugh at something you can no longer remember. You trace the edge of the photograph gently with one finger, thinking about how ordinary that evening had felt at the time, just one stop among many on a long trip, and how impossibly precious it seems now, viewed across the distance of so many intervening years. Outside, wherever you are now, the world has changed considerably since that summer. Roads widened, gas station attendants replaced by self-service pumps, drive-in theatres mostly vanished, swimming holes fenced off or forgotten, replaced by chlorinated pools with posted rules and lifeguards. And yet none of that seems to diminish what's captured in this album. If anything, it sharpens it, makes it feel more singular, a particular way of travelling and a particular way of being a family that simply doesn't exist in quite the same form anymore. You close the album slowly, resting your hand flat against its faded cover for a moment before setting it aside, already knowing you'll return to it again sometime, on some other unremarkable evening, drawn back the same way memory always seems to pull you back toward the things that mattered most, even when you weren't fully aware at the time that they mattered at all. Sitting there on the closet floor, surrounded by boxes you were supposed to be sorting through for some far more practical purpose, you find yourself grateful, simply, for the fact that your parents thought to load film into that camera at all, that they carried you down all those highways and through all those small towns, that they built, however unknowingly, the exact kind of memory that would still be waiting for you here decades later, patient and complete, whenever you finally needed to find it again. It is the kind of ending every family trip eventually reaches, not in a driveway or a kitchen table, but in some quiet, unplanned moment years down the road, when the album resurfaces and the whole journey rises up again exactly as warm as it was the summer you lived it. Proof that some kinds of happiness, captured carefully enough at the time, never really do finish happening at all. So as the highway finally goes quiet, and the last of that station wagon hum fades into memory, think about what it really was underneath all of it. Not the destinations, not the roadside dinosaurs or the diners with their faded awnings, but the simple fact of a family choosing year after year to climb into a hot car together and go looking for something they couldn't quite name. A view, a swimming hole, a fire circle where a ranger's voice could make the whole dark forest feel a little less unknown. The people who lived this were not trying to make memories, not in the way we chase that word now. They were just driving, just packing a cooler the night before, just counting license plates to pass an hour, just calling a name once from the front seat to end an argument in the back. They folded road maps along the same worn creases every summer, and they never once thought of it as anything remarkable. It was simply what a family did with the 2 weeks it had. Maybe that is the thing worth carrying forward tonight. Not the twine ball or the drive-in movie, but the pace of it. The willingness to let an hour pass with almost nothing said at all, and call that togetherness rather than waste. Somewhere in your own week, there may be a version of that gravel turnout waiting, 10 quiet minutes by some water you weren't planning to stop for. It might still be worth pulling over. History's not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a rope swing, and a photograph slightly overexposed, and a family who never guessed how far away that summer would one day feel. And that was enough. That has always been enough. Good night, rest well, and may your own road, wherever it leads tomorrow, feel just a little less hurried.